Standards Module, Lesson Number 2.
The standards module is going to be a time for you to understand the curriculum review cycle. First of all, understand that the curriculum review cycle, although only 5 phases are described, it is a 10-year process. When standards are released every 10 years, then phase 1 begins for us in Bloomington the year after standards are released. It starts with the first phase, which is the first year, where a team comes together and does an initial curriculum review, meaning reviews the standards and prioritizes those standards according to essential, important, and enhancing. This is also a time where the team looks at, investigates, researches, and tries to find materials that will help teach the standards. Knowing that the standards are our curriculum, the materials are the vehicle in which our students use to become proficient in the standards. Phase 2 then is done then in phase year 2, and it is the assessments and units of studies. Again, this is done with a cross-representative team of teachers in that content area. It is a time when teachers create proficiency scales that define what it is our students need to know and be able to do in order to be proficient in those essential standards. So the proficiency scale is the common factor across all sites when looking at assessment of the essential standards. We also create a map or units of study, if that works for your content area, or a map of how those standards will be enacted throughout the course for students. Once we have created those common proficiency scales that is for assessments, then the resources that are created would be stored in the digital resource collections. Phase 3 is enacted in years 3 and 4, and that's where we actually implement what it is we have created for proficiency of the essential standards. It's also the materials where we've adopted the materials to teach the essential standards, important and enhancing, and then also using resources from the digital resource collections. Phase 4 then is the mid-year cycle review, much as mid-year reflects year 5, because it's halfway through the 10-year cycle. And so this again will be a cross-representative team that looks into, did we prioritize the standards correctly? Have we written assessments or proficiency scales that actually assess the students in a way that students can demonstrate proficiency? Some of the questions that we can ask is, what does our data show? Does our data show that our students are proficient and moving along through courses and are prepared for the next course? And looking at instructional best practice and possibility of maybe we need additional materials. Or it might be a time where we readjust the essential, important, and enhancing standards. And then phase 5 happens years 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, where we implement the standards as approved, utilizing the proficiency scales for the assessments, and adding resources to the digital resource collections.
As was mentioned, phase 1 is that initial curriculum review. It is about a 2-year process that's comprised of cross-site representation from the entire district. Within this phase, the curriculum review team takes time to research best practice. What are the best ways to teach students the standards, and the best ways to assess how students are able to demonstrate proficiency in those standards. The team will also look at the standards and prioritize them and unpack them. and look at what materials are there to help support the teaching of the standards.
Phase 2 is, as mentioned before, the assessments and units of study. So through a cross-representative team of teachers, this is the time, which is year 2, where you're writing those assessments and or common proficiency scales for the essential standards. These proficiency scales and assessments, the common essential ones, would be used cross-site to measure students' ability to become proficient on the standards. This is also where we continue to curate resources for all teachers of that content area to utilize in the digital resource collections.
Phase 3 is implementation. This is a time for teachers to continue to collaborate on the standards and the use of materials as well as the assessments. They collect data for the next scheduled phase, so they take a look at how the standards and the best practice are working in the classroom. They also continue to add resources to the digital resource collections.
Phase 4 of the foundational curriculum review is that mid-year cycle, which would happen year 5, where the team comes together again to review the standards. And they ask questions such as, did we prioritize the standards effectively for our students to be able to know and understand what it is they need to know and understand for our course? So did we get the essential, the important, and the enhancing standards correctly prioritized? And then do our assessments and proficiency scales reflect that students know and are able to do what it is we need them to do in our content area?
Phase 5 is also implementation year. This is a time for teachers to go back to the classroom and to use the reprioritization of standards and any materials purchased to continue to collaborate, collect data, and add resources to the digital resource collections.
So in that process, in phase 1, we look at essential standards. We'll look at important and we'll look at enhancing. With the essential standards, there are 4 lenses we lay over all the release standards, and we say to ourselves, which ones rise to the top? Those lenses we look through are endurance. Do the standards have endurance? Meaning, will those standards last long after they finish the course? Do the standards have leverage? Meaning, do they help in other disciplines? And then readiness, do they prepare the students for the next level of learning? And then are they helping students to achieve proficiency on standardized tests? Those are the 4 lenses that are utilized when prioritizing standards as essential.
The important standards are also important to the course. However, they might not rise to quite the level that the essential standards did. These standards are still important, but not essential. They support the essential standards.
The enhancing standards are the standards that could be looked at as either a preview of what's to come for the next level of learning, or it's a review of the content that should have previously been learned. So these standards are, we are required by law to teach the enhancing standards as well, but the depth of coverage is subject to time. Again, the enhancing and the important standards support those essential standards. And through those lenses of prioritization, the standards should fall in alignment with helping students to become proficient in the course.
Thank you.